Well, it's 10:30 on the dot. The conversation continues right here on News Hour. And of course, we still have Marisha Witi on the other side. Let me bring in now Professor Peter Kagwanja and Dr. Barak Muluke with the discussion. Gentlemen, you are watching as David Muradhi spoke. He has discounted some points, but let's begin with the body language of the president. I asked him if the president is angry or frustrated. He discounted that. But let's talk about the issues that may have pushed the president to that corner for him to react. Professor Kagwanja, looking at President Uhuru Kenyatta and what he said, is it time for rotational president, or it's so convenient for the president right now to rotate this thing and propose it to block the deputy?
I don't think President Kenyatta has ever made any move to block the deputy. Those of us who lived through the Moi era knew how decisive a leader at President Kenyatta's position can be in regard to taking action. Under President Moi, we saw Kibaki exit, we saw Karanja exit, we saw Saitoti enter, we saw Mudavadi enter, we saw Saitoti exit. So I don't think the president has any intention at all from historical perspective and from the contemporary action to edge his deputy out. In fact, his agony, it appears to me from the Bomas of Kenya statement, is that he really wanted to pass the baton to his deputy. But his deputy seems not to be running for the baton, but to be running the other way around. You saw those cartoons. The truth of the matter is, there was a handshake in 2013. I was a witness to that, between him and between the president and his deputy. In 2018, there is a handshake between president and the leader of opposition. I thought that was the golden moment for the republic to come together. If you have Raila Odinga, William Ruto, Musalia Mudavadi, Uhuru Kenyatta, Kalonzo Musyoka, what other house are you looking for in terms of Kenya? Okay. So what happens is that everybody else stays stuck in except the deputy. Okay. And that's the most painful part in our effort towards inclusion.
Dr. Buluka, same thing. The president, it looks so convenient right now to edge out the deputy or to make that preposition. He's not done it. That probably because of the arguments going around, it's time for another community to lead. And there's a lot of people who are reading an attempt at blocking Deputy President William Ruto, who is a challenge and whose community has led this country for quite a long time. Do you agree with those sentiments, or do you also think that this was just a statement probably to outweigh the people who are making other arguments in terms of who next should ascend to presidency in this country?
Yes, thank you very much, Ken. I think there's a very serious need to separate between serious policy pronouncements and statements that people have reflected about and which they think that they would like to position in the arena of public conversations towards formation of policy and perhaps even legislation. I think we are talking about a president who has been sitting somewhere in a funeral for 6 hours, and he has listened as people talk about his succession, almost as if he was, God forbid, the individual in the casket, and they are thinking about how they should take over from him. And he reasons, and some people even said there that it is time for our community to provide the next head of state. He then reasons that if that is indeed the case, and there are people who have been saying that there's this family and that family, perhaps it's also about time that we spoke about tribes also staying away. But we must separate between, on the one hand, serious policy statements, and on the other side, emotional graveside pronouncements that are essentially playing to the gallery, and you saw how the gallery responded. With regard, therefore, to their deputy president and the relationship between him and the president, the framers of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 were informed by the history of the office of the number 2 person in the executive. They had seen how frustrating it was to be in that office, and they inevitably built some insulators in the Constitution so that the kinds of things that the good Professor Peter Gakwanja is talking about cannot happen today. If we were under the same constitutional dispensation as we had up to the year 2010, there's no doubt in my mind that William Ruto would not be the president of Kenya today. But those who would want to have him out of the way have their hands effectively tied. There isn't much that they can do. And it is deliberate latitude that was built into the Constitution so that the occupant of the second most important office in the executive can also exercise their freedom of conscience, their freedom of thought, and their freedom of expression, especially on matters that they do not agree upon. I would be very worried as Barack if we were to find ourselves back into a monolithic dispensation such as Professor Peter Gakwanja suggests, that there's only William Ruto who stays out. The good professor reminds me of the words of Robert Moore when King Henry VIII tells him that I would like to marry another wife, and everybody agrees with me. Why is it that you do not agree? And Robert Moore tells him that if everyone agrees with you, Your Majesty, why does it bother you that I do not agree? You have everyone agreeing with you. We have heard that the Deputy President is making it difficult for the President to execute his agenda, that he is disrupting him by going around the country and campaigning. This, I think, is to besmirch the President's capacity for concentration, because the Deputy President has not taken away the President's instruments of work, and that the two of them, in fact, began this 2022 campaign as early as 2012, when they used to say 10 years for Uhuru and 10 years.
I'd like, before we go to that, before we go to that, because we're going to discuss the 10 years for Ruto and 10 years for Uhuru and 10 years for Ruto. But the principal assistant, without a designation in the Constitution, is the Deputy President. He assists the President. When he is constantly out doing the campaign, so to say, and campaigning for 2022, who's supposed to be assisting the President? When Tanga Tanga was coined, it was because President Uhuru Kenyatta said, huyu William namtuma kuangalia, you know, when Tanga Tanga was coined. So if he's not doing what the President has sent him to do, instead, he's going around campaigning for 2022 and making it known to everyone, all and sundry in the country, that he's going to stand for 2022. Does that not sort of do what you're trying to say, undermines the capacity of the President to concentrate on what he's doing?
Kenmi Jungu, the question that we might want to ask is that what has changed? Because the behavior, the comportment, and the activities of the Deputy President have remained solidly the same. What he has done since 2017 rather, is the same that he was doing in the period 2013 to the 2017 election. He was tangering even at that time. His Excellency the President did not seem to mind. And mind you that Article 147 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 states clearly that the occupant of the office of Deputy President will not take up any other state office. That means he cannot even be named as a Deputy President and Minister for any of the portfolios in the cabinet, such as used to happen in the past. Mm-hmm. And therefore, he waits for the President, who is his boss, to detail him with assignments, and where such assignments are not given, he perhaps is going to find himself as an idler in Harambee House Annex, and therefore he will find something else to do.
All right, let me bring this discussion.
The president takes his duties and appoints a super minister, a super cabinet secretary, and gives those responsibilities
of the
there.
deputy president. All right.
The issue is that William Ruto was always expendable, and he has been expended after delivering the presidency for the second time.
All right, a lot of people will agree or disagree with you based on that. But let me bring Professor Kagwanja now. And Professor, listening to Barack and the responsibility by the deputy president, the reasons why he's taken that tangent, and of course he said that there's a different view that you are taking all this now that the deputy president is poised to run for the 5th in the country. What are your sentiments around, especially on what Barack Muluka is putting across?
First of all, Ken, you should rein in Muluka because he's talking too much and in a very windy manner and can confuse the audience. The truth of
I beg your pardon.
The truth of
I beg your pardon.
Okay. But the truth of the matter is as follows. You are a deputy to somebody, you deputize. You are there to wait for your responsibility to be dispensed. That's why you would aspire to be the chief, so that you can also have another deputy. It's a logical in nature. Second, I think Barack quoted authorities, and I like having debate with people who read books like Barack. I'm sure he likes reading Churchill. Winston Churchill says, there is something called the prerogative of the harlot, forgive the language, which is power without responsibility. It's immoral, it is indecent, it is not right.
Prof,
if you have a position,
he didn't know, Prof, that at that time when he will be deputy president, there'll be no responsibility and he has to wait to be assigned by the president. He didn't know that.
You should have known that, because what the architects of the 2010 Constitution did was to create what we call a presidency. It is one office. There are not two offices.
Okay.
It is one office. That's why it is called the presidency. Previously, we had the president and the vice president, and in a sense, from the 1960s, there was a Roos corner there. We more or less borrowed from South Africa, which has what we call an integrated presidency, meaning even if you are not directly assigned responsibilities, you know what you need to do. Tangatangling or moving around the country, soliciting for votes for the coming election, rather than pursuing the set agenda of the country, of the party, is not part of that integrated presidency. It is actually a rebellion. That's why the public is talking about the Tanga rebellion or the Hasra mutiny, something like that.
Okay, gentlemen, unless Barack, you have something to add, I need to move to that class difference and the class narrative.
I'll just put a footnote. Basically, Professor Peter Gakwanja remembers that President Daniel Arap Moi, before he became president, was President Kenyatta's vice president, and he traversed the country more than President Kenyatta did in those years.
All right. Away from that, let's, gentlemen, talk about the class division that is being perpetrated in this country. This sounds like the sole reason right now, and it's the campaign platform for the Hustler Nation. And of course, we've heard about the dynasties and the hustlers. This, people have argued that you cannot polarize this country along classes, because eventually it will catch up to us. That's the argument of David Murade, and who says that it's also the concern of the president. But even as you respond to this, my question, I begin with you, Professor Kagwanja. My question is, at what point do you realize that now it's supposed to be a discussion out of class, out of clan, and it should be about the minority and the people who've not gotten the opportunity to run this country? Professor.
Let's start here that the deputy president is pursuing a two-pronged strategy. On the one hand is the ethnic agenda, and the second hand is a divide and conquer agenda. The ethnic narrative is for the Rift Valley, meaning that the Kalenjins or the people of the Rift Valley have not benefited from this administration, and therefore we need to look for that administration, and therefore Gideon Moi is a traitor what they call the bunyot or something like that of the enemy. Now, when it comes to Mount Kenya region, it is that this is an area where the government has neglected Wanjiku, the hustler, and the ordinary person. Therefore, I am for the ordinary person. But what is the strategy? It is to divide and conquer, because you want to scatter the sheep and then become the shepherd. And in the process, if you are a hyena, you can eat them one by one. It's a very evil message. So people see a monolithic agenda here. It is a class struggle between the hustler and the dynasties. And how many dynasties we have? We are just 57 years old. Dynasties take 100 years, those who are the history. First and foremost, it's a demeanor. There is no dynasty that is, 50 years or so. If you look at the Baganda here, you look at the Chinese civilization, you look at other civilizations. What are we talking about? It is important to talk about the unity of Kenyans. It is important to talk about inclusion of all Kenyans. It is important to go back to the basics of our nation and its foundations, which is justice. Okay. It is equality. Okay. And equality does not come from incitement. It comes from working hard. Working hard and enlightening people, equipping them with the relevant skills in order to rise up. Okay. About 20 years ago, Mejungu, I was not even a hustler. I was below the hustler. At least, Deputy President had some money to buy chicken. I didn't have that. And 15 years on, I was teaching at the Moi University when he was selling chicken. Then I rose up from Moi University and sat where he was. Now, because of the opportunity that this country has, he's now the Deputy President. I'm an ordinary, worker, not a hustler, yes, but an ordinary worker. Let us have a narrative that unites, a narrative that puts us together.
Prof, even yes, as you say that, you mentioned divide and rule. What does that say of the people who are supporting Deputy President, who works with him, who believes in his cause? Because you're saying that he's looking at propelling that narrative and it's dangerous. But in other words, you're trying to say the people around the Deputy President are not thinking.
I didn't say that.
They're following blindly.
I didn't say that it's a divide and rule, because he's not yet ruling. It's a divide and conquer.
And conquer, sorry.
And yes, and this divide and conquer strategy has its mercenaries and its foot soldiers. If you look at the division structurally, go to Kiambu, how many people? 1, 2.
Okay.
Kikuyu, Gatundu. Go to Muranga, Kandara, Kiharu. Go to Nyeri. You can map it out literally.
Okay. The followers of
the followers. Yes. And when they speak, they start to speak, you can almost predict who is going to speak after who.
All right.
Those are what we call foot soldiers. It's an army of conquest. In political sense, we call them mercenaries. Yeah. And mercenaries are people who are on hire in order to do a job. Okay. Now, if you look at the rest of the people, because these are talking, they're on the campaign, nobody else is doing a campaign. Wanjiku is confused. What do we do? Wanjiku, every other member of parliament, every other leader is hedging, staying on the fence to see where the balance tilt. And that is what is making the Kangatas of this world very worried about the future of their power.
All right, let me take this to Barack. Barack, divide and conquer. One of the strategies employed by Deputy President in Central Kenya, and Central Kenya is key, our huge voting bloc, perhaps the biggest in the country, behind President Uhuru Kenyatta. You believe them?
First, I think Professor talks about mercenaries, and conversely, we may want to talk about professional political careerists, and they are there, including in central Kenya and maybe elsewhere in the country. And the truth of the matter is that together with the ruling class within that region, they are probably sleeping through a revolution within their own part of the world. They may go into denial and claim that a certain individual is on the campaign trail. The classes have always been there, and especially in central Kenya. David Murathe admitted here that the classes have been there. What is uncomfortable is the conversation, and those were the words of David Murathe when he said that the president is uneasy about the conversation about the hustlers versus the dynasties. Whether you want to call them the dynasties or you want to call them the haves and have-nots, as J.M. Kariuki, who came from that central Kenya, called it, the difference is the same, that those classes have been there and the conflicts have been there. In Mount Kenya especially, they predate independence. There were the chiefly families, and those chiefly families, some of them went on to become paramount chiefs during the colonial dispensation, and in the post-colonial dispensation, they occupied certain spaces of privilege. The battles and contestations between the Mungiki on the one side and other people on the one side, a factor of class conflict. You cannot wish it away, and that conversation ought to be held. Beyond that, it is true that the BBI is perceived in many parts of this country to be part of the election campaign for 2022. None other than the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga has stated in different parts of the country that the outcome of elections in a place like Msambweni will also predicate the outcome of the BBI, which will in turn predicate the outcome of the 2022 affair. But finally, when one speaks about the hustler, who is this fellow who is called the hustler? Because even the incoming American deputy president has been talking about the hustlers, those people who wake up in the morning, who work hard, who work for themselves, people who are even in employment and who are striving, because to hustle, and I'm surprised that the meaning has usually been limited to one of the entries in the dictionaries. There are numerous entries, is basically to strive. There are people who are striving, the people who are supplying the county assemblies, the county governments, and they are waiting for 2 years, 3 years. They have not been paid. Some of these people are people involved with the construction of roads. It doesn't mean that when you are an engineer constructing roads that you have ceased being a hustler. It doesn't mean that when you are a white-collar supplier of office equipment that you have stopped being a hustler, that when you are a consultant that you have stopped being a hustler. Indeed, there are hustlers who are employed in white-collar positions, people who struggle with rent from one end of the month to the other, who cannot stretch their salaries out, who are worried about the landlord, who are worried about getting that car out of. They are hustlers.
All of them. Okay. But this conversation is limited, Barak. If you look at the dictionary in the mouths of the people who propagate the hustler narrative, it's limited to the people whose fathers had no names, the people who have had nothing, the people who don't have positions, who need to be given time. That's why perhaps the president was concerned with the narratives that are being driven in order to propel the next person to the presidency in this country. But let me bring this discussion now to Kagwanya. I don't know first if you have something to add on that narrative before I proceed.
I like Barak's concept of the Mount Kenya region sweeping through the revolution. Revolutionaries come from within. I have not seen them in Mount Kenya region. What we have is a division. We have a vacuum. President Kenyatta will not be president in 2022, 9th of August. That's certain. And the big question the people in the region are asking...
Unless there's a presidential election dispute.
Well, that's okay. Yeah. But as long as the election takes place, and the president himself has said he's not going to fight for a third term, which he can,
which he cannot. He doesn't even need to say it.
Yeah, but which he can. Even instead of pushing for the referendum, he should be pushing for the third term. But he's not.
No, he cannot do that, Professor. What are you telling us?
No, I'm telling you that
he cannot, Professor.
We are talking about I mean, I don't know what we are talking about.
Third term, you're saying which he can if he was not fighting for the referendum.
No, I'm
there
saying
is no way he can.
Which a dictator would pursue. He is not a dictator. Therefore, it is not an option. That's what I'm saying.
But even if he was
I have said it's not an option. I've said it's not an option.
It's not an option, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's the problem with our language?
No,
now,
you said
if it's not an option, it's not subject for discussion.
Okay.
The point is, there is a vacuum in the people's minds about the future of the Mount Kenya. And politicians do not think about, the present. They think about the future of power, not the future of anything else. And therefore, there must be some anxiety. Okay. And the choices are being made. Is it this one? Is this that one? Is it one? The moment that question is settled, Mount Kenya region will settle like still water.
Who will settle it?
It is going to be settled after the referendum, because the referendum will settle the constitutional question and leaving now the political question.
Okay.
We have two questions here. The constitutional question that ensures our inclusivity as a society. Two, the political question that settles the question of power in 2022.
Okay.
So but some people cannot really separate the two. What the deputy president has done, it is to conflate the two. That the referendum means 2022, which is really a fallacy.
It's usually a test run,
It's a fallacy. The truth of the matter is that we are settling a constitutional question about our nationhood, about how we relate to each other as a people, how we create a house of everybody. That is the referendum question, whether it's BBI or whichever form. The second question is, how do we settle the question of power in 2022? And that is the election question. Now, if you look at those, then we are saying Mount Kenya region is caught into those. The answer that is being given by BBI is that if you have the anxieties of the people answered, meaning money pushed to the grassroots, people being able to go to school wherever they want, you can go to hospital and get your medication, and all those issues, if they are settled, the question of the top leadership does not matter. And that's what David Morada was talking about.
Okay.
David was saying that you need to reduce the weight of the presidency and take it to the grassroots, Wanjiko, so that we do not have competition centralized. We have competition decentered.
Okay. And everyone will be on that table that we are talking about.
That we have fewer disputes over resources. We can have differences of personalities, but resources and development should not be subject of that.
Barak, listening to Prof, I'd like to ask you this. When people will be sitting on that table, same question I asked David Murathe, do you think it's time for other communities not to be offered seats on that table?
Everybody must sit around every table where there is a conversation about the destiny of this country, how it is managed, how it is ruled. But I get exceedingly worried when I hear that if we were to distribute the top cream of the national cake across 5 individuals, then we are going to have included the whole country. First, I have not seen, and I have voted every time since 1979, I have not seen a ballot paper, presidential ballot paper, where they have written their candidate number 1, Kikuyu, candidate number 2, Luo, candidate number 3, Taita, and candidate number 5, Ogiek. I've never seen that kind of ballot paper. But if it is true that those who are pushing that perspective are serious about it, they have told the country that we are experiencing a constitutional moment. I would therefore expect that they are going to inscribe that proposal in the BBI, and which would itself be an unconstitutional proposal, because every Kenyan, regardless of their tribe, regardless of their race, regardless of creed, regardless of religion, provided that they are of the right age and that they fulfill the requirements of the 10th chapter of the Constitution of Kenya, they qualify to sit around a table where discussions about the country are being made. What I fear most is that people are talking of unity of a conspiratorial nature, Because unity is as good as the purpose for which people unite. If you have 5 individuals from 5 tribes out of 43 tribes saying that we are going to distribute power as follows among the 5 of us, then they are conspiring against the rest of the country.
All right, and that discussion that happened in Eastlands was that this must be a forum for everyone to come and sit on the table. And in fact, I'd like to say what Aaron Cheruiyot said once again, if some people are not on that table, we hustlers will bring the table down, and you know how hustlers eat. So that was what he said. Professor Kagwanja.
First and foremost, let's make this point very, very clear, that this is not about tribes. It's about the nation. Every society in the world, for those who have studied history and are looking at contemporary development in constitution making and nation building, will remember that Tanzania explored the fault lines in its own country and found that they are between the islands and the mainland. What did they do? They created a vice president for the mainland and a vice president for the island, and then the president. Yes. And they said, if the president comes from the mainland, therefore the first vice president must come from the island. The purpose of that was to bridge that gap, that the idea of being included in a polity is very, very important.
Okay.
In America, which is the way you know, they have retained what would call a very anachronistic, a quite outdated model, but which serves them. The collegiate, where you have people who are the super delegates deciding on that. The idea is for every community in every state to feel included. And you can give more and more examples. The number 5 or number 6 or number 7 in Kenyan national is not a representation of the tribes. I guess at some stage it should represent ideas. We have given the example of China. China has 7 top leaders. And these top leaders come from different tribes and different locations. But they focus on meritocracy.
Okay.
You cannot be part of the top leadership, the top 7, if you have not governed 100 million people or the equivalent in that particular society. I think my argument has always been, and I've made it elsewhere, that the top 5 who are being proposed in the BBI must not only be weighed on the weight of their tribe, but also their competence and experience in governing this country. Therefore, you marry the value of meritocracy, the value of experience, and also representation of the various shades and colors of this nation.
Gentlemen, we have run out of time. However, I'd like you, even on your closing statements, we should not take even a minute each to tell me, and I'll begin with you, Barack, to close. Do you think President Uhuru Kenyatta would and should make the same mistake that was made in 2002 by the late retired President Moi by announcing and naming his successor? We know he said he's not going to do it, but do you think, because it was a 10-year promise, do you think he should make that same mistake that was made with him, that he didn't ascend to presidency? Just in 1 minute as you close.
First, I don't think it is a mistake. It is his constitutional right. If he thinks that he would like to make that as his valedictory statement to Kenyans, that should be quite fine. And he already told the people of Mount Kenya that when he makes that pronouncement, they are going to be surprised. One would have thought that he already made that pronouncement when he was on the stumps campaigning for himself, when he used to say 10 years for me, 10 years for William Ruto. But we are in a different dispensation where the president is juggling 2 sets of marbles, the marbles of the handshake and the marbles of his earlier promissory notes. If he wishes to anoint a successor, that is very well within his rights. Ultimately, the electorate will decide, even the same way as it decided in 2002.
Okay. Well said, Barack. And Prof, you have a minute or less to finish this for us. We have to close.
We Kenyans like really cheating ourselves. The president has no capacity under the Constitution to point or pinpoint a successor. What he can do is he can try to influence the voter who owns this land, the Wanjiku, to vote in favor of a certain person. And in so doing, he has to sell that. Therefore, it is basically, trying to assume too much when you say the president should appoint a successor or something like that. And I don't think President Kenyatta has made that claim anywhere, and I would like to be shown. But finally, let us make this distinction very clear. We have a moment when we are creating a nation, and that is what BBI is about. And there will come a time when we will settle the political question as to who is going to govern us from 2022 to 2027. If we don't conflate those two and deal with them separately, then you can see the logic that President Kenyatta is following. Why he is quiet now. Wait for him, and we see how he is going to behave when the political moment comes.
Well said, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming, Professor Peter Kagwanja and, of course, Dr. Barak Muluka. And thank you for watching News Hour. Thanks to Marisha Wete. My name is Ken Mijungu. We'll have another opportunity to do this next week, same place, same time. Have a good night and continue engaging us. We are off air right now, but we're still online with all your responses. We'll be looking at them. Have a good night and God bless.